Welcome to the Dinosaur George podcast, a show about paleontology and other earth sciences. Dinosaur George is a public speaker, author, and TV host with 30 years of study in paleontology. He has performed live in over 4,500 events across the US and Canada. Now, here is Dinosaur George.
Hey there, everybody. This is Dinosaur George. This is my first podcast, number 101. I am thrilled to be able to do this, and I hope you guys are going to enjoy the show. It should be a lot of fun. First, for a lot of you who've never heard of me, my real name is George Blassing. My family pronounces my last name Blasing, and that's how I pronounced it through my entire life until I got in the world of retail and my boss insisted that he was going to pronounce it Blassing, and I sort of accepted that. And so ever since, I pronounce it Blassing. But I got the name Dinosaur George from a young student once who came up with a name, and it sort of stuck. And the next thing you know, everybody calls me that. So anyway, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I was the typical kid who loved dinosaurs. I thought dinosaurs were the greatest things on Earth, and I still do. And so that's what I studied my entire life. But I chose a different career path, and let me explain why. I grew up in a relatively small town, and there wasn't a lot of information available about paleontology. I kind of assumed that a lot of the people that I read about in books, I didn't know if they were really degreed, if they did that as a career, or if they did that, they went to school to get educated about it, or was it something that they just liked? So I chose a different career path, and I ended up going into retail, and my career took off. It was a very good career. I ended up being an executive in a really large chain, and so I enjoyed that, but I never stopped loving paleontology and then also animal behavior. I study modern animal behavior. So about 18 years ago, I quit my career, and I decided I was going to dedicate my life to teaching mostly children about paleontology, and that's what I do now. I've traveled all over the United States excavating. I've dug up, Montana, Utah, Wyoming, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, Florida, Texas, you name it, I've been there. So I spent a lot of time digging, but now I spend all of my time on the road, either appearing at events, museums, or speaking at schools, mostly elementary schools. But the most exciting thing for me is the traveling museum. I have a traveling museum that I have a sponsor who is a San Antonio-based affiliate of PBS. It is KLRN. They're my sponsors. With this traveling museum, I get the opportunity to travel all over and bring dinosaurs and other prehistoric life to mostly children who have never had the chance to see a museum. A lot of times it's either because of geographically, they live so far away. Texas is a big state. They live so far away from a big natural history museum that they don't get a chance to go. And then there's economic reasons. There are some kids who are having a difficult, they live in families that have difficult time paying the bills. And unfortunately, a museum falls way down on the list when you're struggling just to keep the family fed. So with my traveling museum, it gives me the opportunity to bring a museum to kids and to communities where maybe they've never had the chance. All right, so that's a little bit about myself, enough about me. Now, let me tell you kind of what to expect from my podcast. Obviously, paleontology is going to be a big, major focus, and of course, dinosaurs are going to be a big deal. But you can also expect for me to cover topics like geology or archaeology or modern animal behaviors. I'll never forget there was I used to host a television show on the History Channel called Jurassic Fight Club. And during that time, I got a chance to interview a paleontologist, Lawrence G. Barnes from out in the Los Angeles area. And Dr. Barnes told me the neatest thing. He said, modern animals are a window into the past. And what he meant by that was you can look at the way animals behave and apply those behaviors to prehistoric animals that may have been the same kind of animal. I mean, you can't take the behavior of a of a lion and say that's the way Tyrannosaurus Rex lived, but you could certainly take hunting tactics from a lion and suggest that tyrannosaurs may have used that. So anyway, in this show, you'll hear paleontology, geology, archaeology. Sometimes we'll talk about space. We may talk about Roman architecture in one. So just expect a big earth sciences kind of show, and that's what it is. Now, it's obviously going to be directed at young people, but it's not Barney. It's not Dinosaur Train. The show, I think, will be just as interesting to adults as it would be to a child. And it's not going to be incredibly technical, and yet I'm going to bring in a lot of special guests who certainly could talk incredibly technical, but I'll try to steer the conversation to be more of a conversation that the average or general public would like. And speaking of experts, I plan on including a lot of interviews, and not just interviews with leading paleontologists or geologists or archaeologists. Certainly I want to try to bring in as many of those as I can. But sometimes you may find that I'm interviewing somebody who just loves rocks, or somebody who works with modern animals, or somebody who studies space. So again, my show is not just dinosaurs, and the experts I have won't just be paleontologists. It'll be a variety of subjects. Now, every show will have a main theme or a main subject where I focus on something in particular. It may be, well, let me tell you, this first podcast, I'm going to actually focus on mosasaurs, which is kind of cool, but I'll get into that in a minute. Something else that we'll do is a segment called Ask Dinosaur George. Prior to doing this podcast, I used to do YouTube videos. I have 100 or so on YouTube. You can just look up Dinosaur George and find them, or you can see a link on my podcast page. The segment is where people could write to me and ask me questions, and then I, in return, would answer them as best I can. So we're going to include that segment here, and it'll be one of two ways. You can go to my website, dinosaurgeorge.com, click on the Ask Dinosaur George page and fill out that form. And if yours is selected, I'll read your question and my answer here on my podcast. But I'm also trying out a new thing. Now, right now, this is not a free call. So young people, before you jump up and pick up the phone and make a phone call, you have to understand this is not a free call. This, whatever your normal phone rates would be. The number is 210-888-9077. You can call, you'll get an answering machine. It'll give you instructions. You leave your first name and then your city, state, or country, then ask your question. And try to be direct. Don't give incredibly long questions because those are very hard to answer. And then each month I'll go in and I will clear all the questions. And so we'll start over every month. And please don't make hundreds of phone calls. Don't do that, because I can tell you when we go through them, if somebody has called hundreds or 40 or 50 or 60 times, we won't answer them at all because of that. So anyway, what you do is you call that number, you leave the message, and then we will play your message on an upcoming podcast where you may hear your name and your question being read, and then I'll answer it. And then I also plan on doing some interviews with my traveling museum. As my traveling museum arrives in your community, and you can go to my website, look at my calendar to see where we're going to be. If you come to the museum exhibit and you have a question, come in and ask me. I have a portable recording device. I'll record your question and I'll put you on. So that's kind of an idea of what you can expect. I hope you guys are going to enjoy the show. I know I've been looking forward for a long time to wanting to do it. So let's get started.
Bring Dinosaur George's traveling exhibit to your school, museum, or city. This is the largest exhibit of its kind in North America and will turn any facility into a natural history museum. You'll see things like prehistoric mammals, giant fish, ancient reptiles, and of course, dinosaurs. It's affordable, amazing, and will be an event you'll never forget. See complete details at dinosaurgeorge.com or call us toll-free, 888-487-7478. Bring Dinosaur George's traveling museum to your community today.
This is Curtis. Curtis, how old are you?
11.
You can't be 11 and work here. How did you work that out?
Well, I love dinosaurs. You're a paleontologist, so why can't I just be here?
Well, that's a great answer. I don't know. Now, Curtis, you've been volunteering. You've done a number of shows with the Traveling Museum. What is it that you like? What do you like the most about when you volunteer? Is there a certain thing you like to talk about?
I like being able to hold the fossils and then talk a lot about them.
What do the kids think when they get to touch something? Are they excited about it? Are they scared to touch it?
Well, sometimes they'll be scared, especially with the coprolite. And
wait, coprolite? What is that word? I don't think I've ever heard that before, sir. Would you explain what a coprolite is?
It's the scientific word for dinosaur poop.
You just said poop on the show? When your mom finds out, man, are you going to be in big trouble, kid? That was an interview I had with a young man named Curtis who works for me. I wish I had more time in this first podcast to play you more of those interviews. I'll try to do that in the next podcast. I interviewed a bunch of really, really fine young men and women. So I'll play their interviews in an upcoming podcast. For right now, though, it's time to talk about Mosasaurs. This is an interview with Mike Everhart, who is brilliant when it comes to some of the sea creatures that once lived, especially here in North America, but all over the world. So I want to play you his interview, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. And I hope you guys learn a lot, because I know I did. Okay, everybody. So Mosasaurs are the focus of my very first podcast. And as I said earlier, there is nobody that I know of that is a better reference and resource than Mike Everhart. Mike is the adjunct curator of paleontology at the Sernberg Museum of Natural History in Hays, Kansas. Mike, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for inviting me.
You bet. So let me ask you, Mike, before we get into the paleontology side of your life, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you kind of ended up where you are now.
Well, it's a long story. I've always been interested in fossils, but having to make a living, I started out training as a biologist and ended up as in the health department here in Wichita-Sedgwick County, eventually worked up to the director of the environmental health group. And then I moved over to the Boeing company for 17 years and helped them clean up the environment here in Wichita. And when I retired from Boeing, I decided I wanted to go into paleontology, full-time, I guess, and wrote the book. Well, I started the website, Oceans of Kansas, first, and then people were asking where they could buy the book. There wasn't any. So I got a contract with Indiana University Press to write Oceans of Kansas, and that was published in 2005. And since then, I've been very busy collecting fossils, describing fossils. I've got over 50 papers out there with my name on them, 2 books, and the edited proceedings from the second Mosasaur meeting that was held at Hays in 2007. And I've just finished writing the second edition of Oceans of Kansas, which will be published next spring sometime.
Oh, how would people get notified of that? Now, oceansofkansas.com is your website. And for anybody out there that wants any sort of information, this thing is loaded with information. So will you be announcing when that book is available and how they're able to buy it through your website, or how would they know?
Certainly, it'll be up on the website. I'll be up on Facebook. I'll be on there's a Mesozoic marine reptiles page on Facebook that we'll be covering that too, and I'll be doing everything in the world I can to get the information out. It won't be a big surprise.
Well, we'll do. If you please let us know, and I'll do everything I can, because I've got the original Oceans of Kansas book, which is amazing. Living in Texas, a lot of the things that you have, I suspect would have been here. So I use yours as a reference to be able to talk a little more intelligently about some of the marine life that lived here in Texas, because at that time the ocean went all the way up through Kansas, right?
It's really the oceans of the Midwestern United States and Canada, because it goes all the way from the Gulf of Mexico through the Canadian provinces to the North Pole. So it's a big seaway at that time that includes Kansas in the middle of it, and I live in Kansas, so that's how it became Oceans of Kansas.
When we think of oceans, everybody obviously thinks of miles and miles deep. Do you have any indication of how deep that would have been, like, let's say, there in Kansas?
For the most part, where the Smoky Hill chalk is deposited across the western part of the state, probably no more than 600 feet, 300 meters, or 200 meters, I guess, and got a little bit deeper toward the western side where the Rocky Mountains were being pushed up, and there was what they call a foreland deep that may have been several thousand foot deep, but for the most part, it was a very shallow, warm, tropical sea.
Man. Well, and again, I'm so eager to get into the paleontology, but there's a couple of other things I wanted to ask you. One, you put amazing photography, wildlife photography, on your Facebook page. What got you into that?
Oh, I've been enthralled with photography almost as long as I've been involved in fossils. But with the advent of the digital age, I had my first digital camera, I think, about 2000. But I've gone through 4 renovations of that. It was amazing because I had my first film camera for almost 30 years, from 1970 to 2000. And it was hard to give it up. But all of a sudden in the digital age, I've taken thousands of pictures now. And the ability with a digital camera to literally zoom in on tiny things and then zoom right back out and take pictures of the moon. It's something I do every night right now. Well, every day, but I've been interested in the various insects that only kind of appear at night or show up at night. And so I go out around 10 or 11 o'clock every night to see what's out there and, put them up on Facebook.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was thinking about that today. I'm not an expert on insects, and I put a lot of stuff up on Facebook that identifies the insects and what they do and whether they're beneficial and that kind of stuff. But the neat thing about it is that all of that information is on Google. And if you want to search for it, you can go out and take these pictures and check on Google and find what you're looking for, and all of a sudden, identify it right down to genus and species, and kind of makes you look like an expert, but I certainly wouldn't claim to be one.
Well, you make the perfect point, and that is, for any of you young listeners, that is a great opportunity to explore nature and get out there. Yes,
very much so. It is. I'm constantly amazed at what is up on the internet now. It goes back to why I created Oceans of Kansas back in 1998. Was that there was nothing on the internet that said anything about mosasaurs. And I finally decided that if I wanted to see it, I was going to have to create it. And that's how I got started in working on the web and creating this monstrous website that really needs to be updated, but is over 250 pages of information right now.
That's what I said. Oceansofkansas.com is just loaded, absolutely loaded with information. It is an incredible resource. Anyone who has any interest at all. And, for people that think of paleontology as dinosaurs, you've got to get an opportunity to look at things like some of the sea life. And I think you'll do what a lot of people do, and that is suddenly come to the realization that paleontology isn't the study of dinosaurs. It's the study of everything. So one other question I want to ask you on a personal level, and then we'll get into paleontology. Last year, I've got to tell you, I used to look forward to going to your page to hear the continuing saga of your midnight visitors to your garden. Can you tell us the story of what was going on?
Well, I live in the middle of town, and I have a very small place for a garden. Right, we're down close to a creek, so everything's just about shaded out. But I've worked on this garden spot, added soil and, nurtured it for years now, 20 years. And I had corn out there, and I had some beautiful tomatoes out there. And the day before I was going to harvest my sweet corn, the raccoons got it. Well, silly me, I should have known better. But 2 or 3 days later, they started getting my tomatoes, and that was a declaration of war. So in late August, we were late last year, but in late August, I started trapping raccoons. And within a month and a half, I had trapped 33 raccoons, almost on a nightly basis. Probably 7 or 8 possums, which weren't bothering anything, so they got released. And toward the fall, I started trapping skunks, and I got 3 of them. On the first 2 I released easily and no problem. The third one about got me. Sprayed, because you put a towel over the cage and then you open the door, and he saw the towel coming and cut loose. But anyway, I decided, well, at that point we were into September, almost October. It wasn't worth it. And my tomatoes were up high. The tomatoes were about gone. So anyway, that was my adventure last summer. This year, the garden has been toast. The raccoons did start getting tomatoes in June, and I trapped 3 more. But after that, the garden kind of died, and so we've had a truce between me and the raccoons right now.
Now, I want you all to realize that when he says trapped, what he's talking about is a catch 'em alive trap, which is a trap that doesn't harm the raccoon at all, doesn't harm any of the wildlife at all. Mike is an absolute steward of the environment. I mean, when you listened earlier, when he talked about his past career, this is a person who appreciates the environment and absolutely loves wildlife. So when he says trap, what he means is he would catch these in a trap that didn't cause any harm, and he would relocate them. I just wonder how many of those raccoons hit the ground and knew exactly which direction home was. Did you name them?
For a while I did. And I also put a little bit of a purple paint tag on their tail. So that I could tell if they came back. Well, none of them that I marked ever came back, but I took them several miles away and across the river, and they wanted to get back really bad. But no, I think there was more than enough supply of raccoons here that they didn't need to replace any of them.
All right. So now let's go into your paleontology. You'd said earlier you always liked fossils. Talk a little bit about your current position, which is the adjunct curator of paleontology there at the Sernberg. First of all, that's a remarkable museum. Talk a little bit about what your role. What is an adjunct curator? What do you do in that position?
Well, that is a position. It's more or less an honorary position. It is renewed every year with the university through the provost. They are very careful to tell me that it doesn't involve any pay, any longevity, or any retirement. No benefits. But what it does do is give me access to, of course, the Sternberg collection, and has allowed me in museums literally from Japan to the Netherlands and across the United States. It gives you the credentials that, really mean that you're into the professional paleontology and you're respectable within that group, and you can talk with the folks that are well known, I suppose, as dinosaur people, Jack Horner and various other folks, Ken Carpenter that I know, and it's a professional level appointment as far as I'm concerned, that's gotten me into places that most people don't get to go. And right. If you're around a museum very long, you realize that the real collection is in the back room or in the basement. Sure. Where the public never sees it.
Why, though, is it important that those prime pieces are not displayed? I mean, people ask me all the time, why is the good stuff, quote unquote, good stuff, why is the good stuff in the back? Well, as somebody that actually studies them, explain why that would be important, that those pieces are available for someone like you to access, but not all out in front of the public.
Well, I guess there's probably a bit of a definition of here. What is the good stuff? What the public sees are the exhibition quality specimens, things that are complete animals, complete skulls, things that they can look at and kind of recognize as creatures, as they're named. What we have in the collections are often parts and pieces of other animals, other specimens that provide tons of information, but maybe aren't up to the level of something that would be readily recognizable by the viewing public. And of course, the other issue is kind of a triage. Most museums have got 10 or 20 times more stuff in storage than they have space available in an exhibition area to show to the public. There's simply not room to get all of these things out on display. So there's several things going on. It's a complicated situation, but mostly we work with study specimens that may have lots of neat information in them that we're interested in, but something that the public may not recognize as being exciting, I guess,
right,
would be a term.
So what the public sees are the pieces that would make sense to somebody that doesn't have your level of knowledge, and the things that are not out are probably something that the average person would look at and think, I don't even understand what that is.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, your fossils don't occur in the ground like the first one showed up there in Jurassic Park 1, or Jurassic.
Right. Yeah, Jurassic Park,
where the guy just kind of brushed off the sand off the top of the raptor there. There's a lot of digging involved. Things are crushed, things are scattered, broken, missing. And it takes a lot of work to prepare a fossil in such a way that it looks like it died yesterday, if you will. If it's setting in an exhibit somewhere and it's complete and it is recognizable. But a lot of the things that we work with are just fragments of that, would be a same specimen sort of thing, that are neat for us because we can see some of the details that we're interested in, but not necessarily something that the public would understand or be interested in. And certainly there's lots of things in the storage in the collections that we could make an exhibit out of, but then we get into the problem of having space to actually do that and to explain again to the public.
Right. Well, let's talk a little bit. You're talking about what it's like when you're excavating these. You hear people talk about a paleontologist being in the field. Explain what is the field for the average? Because for some people, the field is a place where you see tractors plowing up to plant grain. So what is when they say the field? What does that mean?
Well, generally that means going out in the rocks or into a geological formation that you're interested in that produces fossils of a certain kind. In my case, it would be mosasaurs or plesiosaurs or big sharks and fish. In Wyoming, it may be dinosaurs, or up in the Green River Formation, it may be millions of little fish preserved, in the volcanic ash. That's the field. In Kansas, mostly I work in the Smoky Hill Chalk, and it is badlands, a lot like you would expect to see in western South Dakota, but it's the soil is all gone. There's no vegetation on it. You can walk for a couple of miles in some places on rock, and it is totally different from the field that the tractor is, or the farmer is plowing up or harvesting grain. But we do have some situations here in Kansas where we have had bones plowed up by a tractor too. So it's all kinds of things, but mostly it's just going out in the bare rocks and looking around until you found something. And lots of times you don't. If it was that easy, everybody could do it. But we spend hours literally walking and looking and picking up scraps and trying to, identify what we find, but still looking for something that is more complete, a mosasaur skull or a big fish or something along those lines. And most of the time we lose because it's just simply not there or not eroding out at that point. So we'll come back, we keep looking. It's just part of field work in paleontology.
So each season that transpires, you may be walking down the same trail year after year, but the natural erosion is giving you a new view into that same hill that you've been looking at year after year?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. One of the neat things about the chalk is that it erodes fairly rapidly. And so we've got one place, our favorite site that, we've collected literally hundreds of fossils out of, but over a 20-year time span. So, yeah, we'll walk over the same thing and not see anything. And then, a month later or so, go back and look at it again. And there's been a rain, and all of a sudden there's the edge of a bone coming out. And golly, then things get exciting.
What is the most memorable? And I know you've collected over a long time, so it's like asking who's your favorite child. If you've got 3 kids, how do you pick? But is there something, Mike, that stands out as the most memorable thing you found?
Well, that I found, not so much that, well, how do I answer this? The most memorable fossil that I've ever worked on is a big Mosasaur skull, about 4 feet long. Unfortunately, it was found by somebody else, a poacher actually, that was trying to steal it off of private property. And he had it partially exposed when the property owners found him and ran it off. And I got to do the dig and the preparation of that skull. And to me, that is hands down the best thing that I've ever collected. My wife collects with me or finds fossils with me, and our usual division of labor is for her to find them and me to dig them up. So she has found some very interesting things: a swordfish skull, half of a 14-foot long Zaphactus fish, Mosasaur bones, and so on. And so it's kind of a teamwork thing. But the big skull that I dug up and prepared for the bird family out here, Tylosaurus prorigor, had to be my best, kind of a once in a lifetime experience.
Man, do you deal a lot with? See, what for all you listeners, when Mike goes out, Mike, you don't just walk onto anybody's property without permission, right?
No, just about all of the fossil collecting areas here in the state of Kansas are on private property. So first thing you have to do is have permission to be there, or the sheriff will come take you away sometimes. And that's different from the issues that people in dinosaurs have with the federal government and having to have permission or all of the paperwork done to collect on federal land. So our process is a little simpler here, but we still have to have permission to be there. And the way, I don't buy or sell fossils. So the way that I work it, if I find something on private property, my arrangement with the landowner, the property owner, is to donate that fossil to a museum in their name, and they get to take it off of the tax purposes. We'll get it appraised by a professional appraiser, and sometimes that's a considerable amount of money right now as a write-off.
Wow. So without the support of the public, all of those fossils, if nobody was allowed to collect them, what would happen? Let's say that back on the side of that hill where one eroded out today, what would happen if there was nobody like you to go out there and collect it?
Well, over a very short period of time, measured in months or years, the fossil would literally fall apart and wash down the creek. We see it with shark's teeth very rapidly out here. We have a big shark called Cretaceous that produces teeth that are 2.5 inches tall or so. But the shark is about the size of a modern great white, and shark teeth are a fairly common fossil in the chalk. But once they erode out in perfect condition, they're shiny, they're dark brown, just beautiful, like they fell out of the mouth of the shark. But after 6 months to a year, they turn white, and then they start falling apart. And it just breaks my heart to pick up something like that has been secured safely in the ground, in the rock, for 85 million years, and then disappears in the matter of a few months. So, yeah, fossils are washing out all the time, and they have been washing out for millions of years. And if you don't pick them up, they're going to be gone. They'll break right back down to the dirt and the dust, and wash down the creek and be gone.
Wow. Okay, so let's get into mosasaurs specifically. The biggest question I get from people: why is a mosasaur not a swimming dinosaur?
Well, the best definition, I guess, of a dinosaur is that it's a terrestrial animal. It has 4 feet. It walks on the land. It doesn't swim. There are no marine dinosaurs unless you consider some of the toothed birds like Hesperornis or Baptornis as, they're dinosaurs because theropod dinosaurs and birds and feathers all go together, but they are swimming in the ocean. Okay, well, you could consider those, I guess, to be a swimming dinosaur. But then the other side of it, things like mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs are reptiles, lizards, that actually returned to the ocean and became adapted to marine life. But they were never a dinosaur. They were lizards to begin with, squamate lizards in the case of mosasaurs, that simply returned to the ocean. So that's the big difference, and that's a hard concept sometimes for people to understand. It's a fossil and it's big and it's got teeth. Why isn't it a dinosaur? Why can't I call it a dinosaur? It's not.
So it lived at the time during the Mesozoic, at the time of dinosaurs, but that it is differentiated because it is. I mean, that's like saying, well, mice and elephant lived together, so would they be the same family?
Right.
Okay, great. So let me. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
But the same thing applies to pterosaurs. We've got, Pteranodon was found first and most here in Kansas, but it is not a dinosaur. It's a flying lizard or flying reptile, but it has zero affinity other than being a reptilian form to dinosaurs. And mosasaurs and the rest of them are the same way. They're completely separate animals, and you have to consider turtles in there too. I don't know anybody that would call a giant turtle from the chalk or protostega, who is big as a small car. You wouldn't call that a dinosaur. It's a turtle. It looks like a turtle. Okay, well, the same with the rest of these guys. They're not dinosaurs. They're something completely different, and they're just as fascinating.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I as I learned more about mosasaurs, I absolutely fell in love with them. Now, we use the word mosasaur, and in the Jurassic World movie, the most recent one that came out, with my traveling museum, I constantly have kids walking in saying, "Do you have a mosasaur?" And I say, "Yes, we have a tylosaur." And they look at you like, "Well, what's a tylosaur?" Mosasaur is just the family name, right? But are there other species within the mosasaur family?
There's at least 40 or 50 other species, and even as I'm talking, there's others being named. I've got my name on 2 of them already, but mosasaur is just a generic term for this marine reptile, a squamate lizard that returned to the ocean. The first mosasaur was found in the Netherlands in a limestone mine, and this was about 1790, a long time ago. And they didn't know what it was. At first, they thought it was a crocodile. It's been called a whale, a big fish. And finally, a scientist by the name of Cuvier looked at it and decided that it actually resembled a modern lizard, the varantid lizards. And, he realized then, or started to think about extinction, because this is an animal that obviously still wasn't around, and how do you explain that if everything has always been as it has been? So anyway, that became Mosasaurus, the same genus as appeared in the latest Jurassic World movie, but that's only one of many different genus and species of mosasaurs. It was named Mosasaurus first, and then, golly, it took at that point 20 years to actually give it a species name, Hoffmanni. But that's the first mosasaur that we know about. And then coming to America, they started finding mosasaurs here. There were scraps of mosasaurs in New Jersey and along the eastern coast, but nothing very complete. The first mosasaur that was really found here was collected about 1830 from South Dakota, and it was actually acquired by a German nobleman, Maximilian von Mead, who took it back to Germany. They prepared it out and called it Mosasaurus maximiliana. But there's a big long story behind it. It turned out that part of that particular specimen had already been named as an ichthyosaur, and it became Ichthyosaurus missouriensis. So that first specimen becomes Mosasaurus missouriensis, and that's the first one named from the United States. And then about 1868, the first Tylosaurus is discovered in Kansas, and it becomes Tylosaurus prorigor. And then from there, we get out to a whole series of new species being named by Cope, mostly by Cope. And, it got out of hand because at that point, every scrap of bone became a new species. And it took a while to sort some of that back down and synonymize these poorly described animals into one group. And that happened. Williston did the first of that, and then the guy Dale Russell, in his 1967 book, kind of got everything settled down to a few very valid species. And then since that point, we've been steadily finding new things around the world and naming new species of mosasaurs. And like I mentioned earlier, we've probably got at least 45 or 50 actual species of mosasaurs that existed during the latest 30 million years of the Mesozoic, the late Cretaceous.
Wow. So what was happening is that initially there was almost an eagerness to give a new name to a piece, but then later on, what you're saying is, as you guys looked more, and I say you guys as them, not you, but yeah. As they looked more closely, they saw that some of these things had so much similarities that they were clearly an animal that had already been named. And so paleontologists went back and started going back through and then narrowing down so that when you say Tylosaurus prorigor, that is a definitive species. And now when somebody finds another one, you can compare it to yours. And that's how you determine who is valid of a new name, or is he just one of these? Does that make sense? Well,
yeah, the biggest problem 100 years ago was the fact that they didn't have very many complete specimens, and paleontology was brand new. They didn't have the tools, if you will, in terms of describing things to really narrow it down. So you'd find a piece of this and a piece of that, and they looked different, so you concluded that was two different species. But there's lots of things involved in terms of the way things are preserved or crushed or not crushed. And Williston and others were able to go back and look at the big picture. They were able to look at hundreds of specimens where Cope was looking at one at a time and able to narrow it down and put things together and said, yeah, these two are the same species. And now we've got complete specimens on most of the species that we've named so far, and it's relatively easy to go in and if you find something new, to compare it to what we already have and say this is what it is. Case in point, though, Tylosaurus kansasensis that I named in 2005 was something that they'd been kicking around. The first specimens were found in 1878. And they've been kicking this thing around. Even, George Sernberg knew it wasn't Tylosaurus prorigor, but they didn't know what it was. And nobody stopped take the time to describe it until I started doing it back in the 1990 was when I was talking it over with Gordon Bell and J.D. Stewart and said, hey, we know this is different. Let's name it. And it took 15 years, but it got done finally.
Wow.
But now we've got 3 species of Tylosaurus here in the chalk in Kansas that pretty much are our starter population, if you will. Tylosaurus kansasensis was the first recognizable species of Tylosaurus. And then you get Tylosaurus nepiolicus and then Tylosaurus prorigor. And the Tylosaurus prorigor is the most successful and the largest of the bunch. But they start much smaller and much fewer. And Mosasaurs, as near as we can tell, at least two groups of them, or one group at least, evolved here in the Western Interior Seaway. And the earliest specimens are found in Texas with Dallosaurus and some of the other mosasauroids that weren't quite mosasaurs. They still had feet. They were lizards that were living on shore and feeding or swimming in the ocean or for hundreds of thousands of years until they finally, totally adapted to the marine environment.
Wow. Do we have an idea of when they made that leap from land to aquatic? Does the fossil record give us any indication of that?
It's pretty flaky. Right now, we don't have a lot of good fossils from that time, but it would be about 100 million years ago, 110 at most. Of course, the end of the age of dinosaurs is about, 65 or 66 million years now. Right. If you go back 110 million years, that's about the time that they're really starting to enter the ocean and get bigger. So we don't have a lot of little mosasauroids or mosasaur-like animals from that time period because they probably ended up being eaten.
So talk about the size. What are the sizes of some of the bigger ones, or how big do you think these things could get?
That's currently being debated. We had the 5th Mosasaur meeting here earlier this spring, and one of the papers that we did present was on how big did it get, and it was based on, of course, Jurassic World and this monstrous Mosasaurus that they had in the big tank. And of course, everybody, I think, realizes that was too big. And it certainly would have taken 50 years to grow it to that size. But in any case, we've gone back. The largest mosasaurs that we know about, probably Mosasaurus and maybe Tylosaurus in the same range, were 50 to maybe 50 feet 55 feet is probably the top of their size range. Wow. And that's a very big, bulky animal.
Boy, that's bigger than Tyrannosaurus Rex or longer.
Yeah. Well, the skull would have been much larger than T-Rex. The skull on these things would have been 6.5 feet long. T-Rex is about 4 feet. Wow. The teeth are smaller. I mean, it's a different kind of an animal. And it's one of the things that I keep telling people about mosasaurs, that they grab their prey and they swallow it whole for the most part.
Well, how do you know that, and how do you know what they eat?
Well, sometimes we're very lucky and find stomach contents. We find an animal that died shortly, for whatever reason, after eating, and its stomach contents, mostly for mosasaurs, include fish. In some cases, we've got some sharks preserved, a bird, Hesperornis up in South Dakota is just part of the stomach contents. The one that I'm interested in, or that occurred here in Kansas, is the one that Charlie Sernberg found in 1918 that included the bones of a plesiosaur.
Wow.
And that one, that was a big secret for a long time. Charlie published it 1923 or so when it finally came out, but nobody paid any attention to it. He sent it to the Smithsonian. They mounted, if you've been to the Smithsonian Museum, there's a big 29-foot Tylosaur mounted in their display, and it's been there for, I think it was mounted in 1920 something, but it's been there for 90 years. What they didn't tell you about that specimen is that that's the one that included the bones of a plesiosaur. The little plesiosaur bones are in the collection. I got to go in and dust them off after 80 years. and see that the mosasaur had actually eaten this plesiosaur, which is a pretty big chunk for even a 30-foot mosasaur. So they were capable of eating large animals, but for the most part, they were fish eaters. And if you look at their teeth, they're not cutting teeth. They don't have a serrated edge like a T-Rex tooth. They're simply there to grab and kill and swallow. And did that quite well. And most mosasaurs aren't these 30-foot or 40-foot or 50-feet animals. Most are down in the 20 to 25-foot range and would have been fish eaters for whatever. That was the most common prey anywhere in the seaway, and they were taking advantage of it, and they were doing quite well.
Now, is there any evidence to suggest that they hunted and lived in groups? Were they familiar? Did they live in family groups? Is there any way to know that?
Actually, no evidence. We don't find for very, very rarely find mosasaurs associated with one another. I don't know of any good examples, except several examples now of mosasaurs as stomach contents, where one species was eating the young of another species.
Oh, so they're not getting along at all.
No, there was a Texas. There are Texas specimens down there that are really good about that, and there's one up in South Dakota that includes a smaller mosasaur. So that's an association. That's not a good association. Also, we have a mother mosasaur, if you will, up in South Dakota that included the bones of about 5 baby mosasaurs of the same species. So we're pretty sure those were embryos that died when she did.
Wow.
But that's about the limit of it. We don't find them together. And what we do find is a lot of mosasaur on mosasaur damage, bites, crushed flippers, big bite marks on the skull of an animal by another mosasaur. The type specimen of Tylosaurus kansas has 2 huge gouges across the top of the skull, the frontal, and the skull is crushed, and it looks like the neck is broken. And it looked, the animal was not fed upon, he just sent to the bottom and killed. So what we think is they didn't get along very well. And so the answer to your question is no, they probably didn't work together out there.
Wow.
I would postulate, I guess, or guess that maybe the females might have, or that the young might have swam with the mother mosasaur until they got bigger, because they're born out in the middle of the seaway, and from the moment of birth, they are prey. And so you've got these big sharks, you've got other mosasaurs, you've got Zophactinus, 18-foot Zophactinus that would be more than happy to eat a little mosasaur. So I wonder if they didn't at least stay together for a while until the young got big enough to make it on their own. But we find quite a few remains of young animals out there that simply didn't make it, that were preyed upon very quickly after they were born.
And that was a tough world.
It was. You wouldn't want to be in that ocean.
Wow. Well, one of the future shows that we want to do is talk about some of the other aquatic reptiles, like the plesiosaurs and the ichthyosaurs. Would love to have you come back if you'd be interested. We would love to have you come back and tell us about some of those other ones, because I think they're just as fascinating.
Certainly. Ichthyosaurs, we see the end of the age of ichthyosaurs here in our late Cretaceous, so I can't say much about them. They're simply not here. Plesiosaurs, actually Kansas is the source of most of the modern forms that we know about plesiosaurs today. Of course, Elasmosaurus was found here first. Polycotylids were found here. We've got the last of the big pliosaurs. Lioplurodon, one of the biggest plesiosaurs from the Jurassic, devolved, if you will, into pliosaurs that were living here in the Western Interior Seaway before Mosasaurs came along. They were the big guy. And then the first Mosasaurs came, and within about 1 million years, for whatever reasons, the pliosaurs died out and Mosasaurs took over. So we've got some interesting stories about that particular branch.
Boy.
And of course, we've got marine birds that are fascinating, birds with teeth, and Pteranodon. Pteranodon is the world's favorite pterosaur, but it's only found here in Kansas.
Wow.
And it only existed for 6 to 8 million years, but because of Lost World and King Kong and Fantasia and even the first Jurassic Park, all the movie directors all picked on Pteranodon, so everybody in the world knows about this pterosaur from Kansas.
Right. Wow.
That's cool.
Well, I tell you, I cannot tell you how much I appreciate you taking time out of your day, taking time out of the raccoon battle you're in. I mean, sincerely, I really do. Mike Everhart is absolutely one of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to anything to do with any of the marine reptiles living in North America. And quite frankly, you know more about marine reptiles than anybody I've ever met anywhere in the world. He is the adjunct curator of paleontology at the Sernberg Museum of Natural History in Hays, Kansas. Mike, please, and also go to his website, oceansofkansas.com, one word, oceansofkansas.com. And everybody, you need to go there. Mike, do you have like a mailing list through your website that they can join, or should they just check to see the release of when your book comes out?
I would say just check back. I tried doing a blog, I guess, attached to the website, and it just got overwhelmed with people trying to be funny or profane and things like that. So I will announce it. It won't, probably won't happen before June of 2017, but I will be trying to make a big deal of it. They tell you when you're an author, don't give up your day job.
Well, but it sounds like, right, your day job right now sounds like you work for free anyway. So what difference would it make?
Let's do that. But I'm blessed with the opportunity to work for free. I think that's probably the best way of saying it.
Right. Well, Mike, thank you. Really, sincerely, thank you so much for taking time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, George. I'm glad to be here.
All right. Thanks.
Take care.
All right, everybody, that wraps up this very first episode. I am so grateful to Mike Everhart for coming on and teaching us about mosasaurs. I appreciate that very much. I apologize that I wasn't able to fit the Ask Dinosaur George segment in on this very first podcast, but it's only because I spent so much time at the front kind of introducing myself and explaining what to expect. So I promise you guys that in my next podcast, I will include the Ask Dinosaur George segment. I also had a bunch of interviews of younger adults and then some little tiny kids during our traveling museum event that we had at KLRN Studios downtown here in San Antonio at the end of August 2016. So I'll play those interviews as well. So for all of you who I interviewed and I told you it would be on this podcast, please accept my apologies. I just ran out of time. For everybody out there, thank you for listening, and I hope this is something that you would enjoy. Make sure to go to my podcast page. My podcast, those are big words apparently. Go to my podcast page and check the links page. It has links to everything. You can follow me on Twitter, follow me on Facebook, different things to look at. So anyway, go to the site, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you guys so very much for listening, and I really look forward to doing the next one.
Thank you for listening to the Dinosaur George Show. Please follow us on our social media links and join our mailing list. If you're interested in having Dinosaur George speak at your event, please visit our website at